Only a few days passed, and Wei Wuxian realized that he might have made a wrong choice. The donkey that he conveniently picked up was too hard to please. Although it was only a donkey, it would exclusively eat fresh, young grass with dewdrops still hanging off them. If the tip of the grass had a streak of yellow, it wouldn't eat it. Passing a farm, Wei Wuxian stole some wheat straws to feed it, but after chewing them, it spit it out with a PTO, even louder than that of its human counterparts. If it didn't eat high-quality food, it wouldn't budge, and it'd lose its temper and kick around. For multiple times, Wei Wuxian was almost kicked by it. Aside from that, its brays also sounded extremely horrible to the ear. It was useless, no matter as a mount or a pet. Wei Wuxian couldn't help but to think of his sword. The sword was probably collected by the leader of a prominent clan and would have hanged on a wall as a trophy that they could show other people. After pushing and pulling along for a few blocks, the road reached a vast farmland of some village. Under the scorching sun, there was a large pagoda tree and thick green grass underneath it. Beside the tree, there was an old well, with a barrel and a dipper on the side, placed there by the farmers for any passers-by to quench their thirst. The donkey ran over there, and nothing could make it leave. Wei Wuxian hopped down and slapped its honored buttocks. "You're definitely destined for wealth, even harder to please than me." The donkey spat at him, while they fooled around aimlessly. A group of people approached from within the fields. The people carried handmade bamboo baskets, and wore cotton clothes and straw sandals, emitting the rustic airs of rural villagers. In the group, there was a young girl with a round face that could be considered delicate, possibly because of walking for too long under the sun. They also wanted to come over to rest by the shade and have some water. However, seeing that there was a wild donkey tied to the tree, and a lunatic with heavy makeup and disheveled hair, they were reluctant to go over. Wei Wuxian had always thought of himself as one who was courteous towards women, so he moved over, emptying some space, and went to struggle with the donkey. After realizing that he was harmless, the people were finally at ease to come over. All of them were drenched in sweat and had ruddy cheeks. Some were fanning themselves and some fetching water. The girl sat by the well and smiled at Wei Wuxian, as if she knew that he purposely moved away. One of the people held a compass in his hand. He looked into the distance, and then lowered his head questioningly. "We're already at the foot of Dafan Mountain, so why hasn't the pointer started moving yet?" The designs and pointer on the compass looked strange, indicating that it wasn't a normal compass. It wasn't one that showed the north, south, east, and west, but one that showed the directions malicious creatures, also known as a compass of evil. Wei Wuxian realized that this was probably a poor cultivation clan from the countryside. Aside from highbrow, affluent clans, there were also smaller clans like this, who closed their doors and cultivated on their own. Wei Wuxian thought that they might have left their village to either find a clan, whom they were distant relatives to, or to go night hunting. The middle-aged man leading the group called for people to take a drink and replied, "Your compass might be broken. I'll get you a new one later. Dafan Mountain is less than 10 miles ahead of us, which means that we cannot rest for too long. We have struggled through the whole journey, and if we relax now and fall behind, with other people beating us to it, it wouldn't have been worth it." As expected, it was a night hunt. A lot of refined cultivation clans called traveling to places and exorcising evil beings hunting, because of how these creatures often appear at night. It was also called night hunting. There were countless cultivation clans, but only a few were distinguished. Without the contributions from its ancestors, if an average clan wanted to become famous and receive respect in the cultivation world, it would have to show its abilities. Only if a clan captured a fierce monster or a terrorizing being could it have then been treated seriously. This was originally Wei Wuxian's specialty area. However, during the days of traveling, he destroyed a few graves, but only found small ghosts. He happened to need a ghost soldier to do evil for him, and decided to go to Rice Mountain to try his luck. If he found a good one, he'd capture it and put it to use. After the group of people finished resting, they prepared to move on. Before they left, the round-faced girl took a small, partly ripened apple out of her basket and handed it to him. "Here you go." Wei Wuxian extended his hand to receive it, grinning broadly. But the donkey also opened its mouth and bit at it. Wei Wuxian quickly took the apple away. Seeing that the donkey craved the apple so much, he thought of a good idea. He gathered a long stick and a fishing thread, hanged the apple on one end, and dangled it in front of the donkey. The donkey smelled the apple's refreshing scent from in front of him and wanted to eat it. Chasing the apple, which was always a centimeter away from him, Its speed was faster than the best horses Wei Wuxian had ever seen, leaving only dust behind it. Without stopping, Wei Wuxian arrived at Dafanshan before dark. Upon arriving at the foot of the mountain, he finally realized that the fan wasn't the one he thought it was. It got its name because, looking from far away, the mountain looked like a kind, chubby Buddha. There was a small town below the mountain, named Buddha's Feet. The number of cultivators who gathered here were far more than what he had expected. Everything was a jumble, with people from different sects and clans walking down the streets, all in uniforms of different colors, almost blinding to the eye. For some reason, all of them wore distressed expressions. Nobody bothered to laugh at him even though they saw his strange appearance. In the center of the long street, a group of cultivators gathered, talking in serious tones. It seemed as if their opinions differed greatly. Even from afar, Wei Wuxian could hear them talking. In the beginning, everything was fine, but they suddenly became agitated. I think that there are no soul-consuming beasts or spirits in the area at all. It's clear that none of the compasses of evil showed anything. If there isn't, then how did the 7 people lose their souls? They couldn't have all attained the same disease, could they? I, for one, haven't heard of this disease at all. Even if the compass of evil is not showing anything, does it mean that there's nothing in the area? It can only point out an approximate direction, without any specifics, so it shouldn't be fully trusted. Maybe there's something here that can interfere with the pointer's direction. Do you remember who created the compass of evil? I've never heard of anything that can interfere with its pointer's direction. What do you mean? Are you implying anything with that tone of yours? Of course, I know that Wei Ying created the compass of evil, but it's not as if his creations are flawless. Aren't we allowed the option of doubt, at least? I never said that you can't doubt it, much less his creations are flawless. So why accuse me? And so, their argument had turned to another direction. Wei Wuxian passed them on his donkey, giggling and laughing. He didn't expect that. After so many years had passed, he was still alive in the cultivators' conversations. This was the so-called much ado about Wei. If there was ever a poll to find out whose popularity was the most lasting in the cultivation world, the winner would be no other than Wei Wuxian. To be honest, the cultivator wasn't wrong. The compasses of evil in use today was the first version that he made, and were, indeed, not specific enough. He was in the middle of making improvements when his den was destroyed, so he had to put everyone through the inconvenience of using the imprecise version 1. Anyways, creatures that ate blood and flesh were usually low in level, such as walking corpses. Only the more refined high-level monsters, or ghosts, were capable of eating and digesting souls. This one at 7 at once. No wonder so many clans had gathered here, since the prey was by no means a trivial matter. It was inevitable for the compasses of evil to make mistakes. Wei Wuxian reined in the rope and harped of the donkey's back, holding the apple, which had been ahead of it for the whole journey, in front of its mouth. One bite only. HMPH. Are you trying to eat my whole hand with that bite of yours? He ate a few bites from the other side of the apple, and stuffed it back into the donkey's mouth, pondering upon how he came down to the point of sharing an apple with a donkey, when suddenly someone bumped into his back. He turned around to see a girl. Although she bumped into him, she didn't acknowledge him at all. Her eyes were dull, and she had a smile on her face, staring into the distance without blinking. Wei Wuxian followed her gaze, and saw the dense mountaintop of Dafan Mountain. All of a sudden, the girl started dancing in front of him without saying anything. The dance was wild, with her arms flinging about savagely. Wei Wuxian was watching the performance with keen pleasure when a woman ran over, lifting her dress slightly. She embraced the girl and cried, "Ayan, let's go back, let's go back." Ayan brushed her off with force, her smile still unfaded, creating a terrifying sort of affection, and continued to dance. The woman had to chase her down the street, sobbing while running. A street vendor on the side spoke. "How awful. Ayan from Blacksmith Zheng's family has escaped again. It must be horrible for her MOM. Ayan's husband and her husband, all of them were." Wei Wuxian wandered around, piecing together the strange event that happened here from picking up on different people's conversations. On Dafan Mountain, there was a burial ground. Most of the ancestors of the townspeople from Buddha's Feet were buried here, and sometimes unidentifiable corpses would also receive a spot and a wooden plaque here. A few months ago, in a dark and stormy night, the wind and the rain caused a piece of land on Dafan Mountain to slide and collapse, which happened to be the burial ground. Many older graves were destroyed, and a few coffins were exposed to the air and struck by lightning, causing both the corpses and the coffins to be charred black. The townspeople of Buddha's feet were extremely uneasy. After a few rounds of prayers, they rebuilt the burial ground again, assuming that everything would be just fine. However, ever since then, people in the town started to lose their souls. The first one was a sluggard. He was a poor wretch, loafing about and doing no work at all. Because he loved to hike on the mountain and catch birds, he happened to be stuck in the mountain during the night of the landslide. He was frightened to death, but luckily he was safe. The peculiar thing was that, after a few days, he suddenly married someone. His wedding was quite large, and he said that he wanted to be charitable from now on and settle down. On the night of the wedding, he was completely drunken, having never woken up ever since he lay on the bed. The bride didn't receive an answer as she called him. Only when she pushed him over did she realize that the groom had dreary eyes and a cold body. Aside from being able to breathe, he was no different from a dead person. After a few days of lying on the bed, not eating or drinking anything, he was finally buried. Unfortunately, the bride had become a widow shortly after she married. The second one was a Yan from Blacksmith Jung's family. The young girl had just received an engagement when her future husband was killed by a wolf on the second day, while he was hunting in the mountains. After she got the news, she also became like the sluggard. Luckily, after some time, her soul-losing disease was cured on its own. However, after this, she went crazy, cheerfully dancing to other people when she was outside. The third one was a Yan's father, Blacksmith Jung. Until now, this had happened to 7 people. Wei Wuxian considered the situation and figured that it was most likely a soul-consuming spirit, not a soul-consuming beast. Although only one word was different between the two, they were completely different beings. A spirit was a ghost, while a beast was a monster. To him, it was likely that the landslide had destroyed an ancient tomb, and, with lightning splitting the coffin open, a resting spirit had been let out. If he looked at the type of coffin and the presence of any seals on it, he could figure out whether or not this was the case. However, the townsfolk of Buddha's feet had already buried the charred coffin somewhere else and laid the corpses to rest again, which meant that there wouldn't be a great deal of evidence left. To go up the mountain, one had to hike up trail that started in the town. Wei Wuxian sat on his donkey and rode up the hill slowly. After a while, a few people walked down with ominous expressions on their faces. Some of them had scars on their faces, and they were talking all at once. With the darkening sky, they all jumped as they saw a person who looked like a hanged ghost approaching them. After cursing, they walked around him quickly. Wei Wuxian turned his head around and thought, maybe they were frustrated because it was a strong prey. He didn't think too much about it and slapped the donkey's buttocks, making it jog faster up the mountain. Coincidentally, he missed the group's whining, which happened shortly afterward. I haven't seen anyone like this. Would the leader of a big clan like that need to fight over a soul-consuming spirit with us? He probably killed tons of them when he was young. What can we do? He's a sect leader. No matter which clan you choose to offend, you shouldn't offend the Jiang clan. And no matter which person you choose to offend, you shouldn't offend Jiang Cheng. Let's just pack up, leave, and feel sorry for ourselves. If it was darker, then one would need a torch to move freely about in the mountain's forest. Wei Wuxian walked for a while, but he didn't meet many cultivators. He was quite surprised. Is it possible that half of the clans who came were in Buddha's feet arguing and talking empty words, while the other half could only come back defeated, like the group of people who just passed by? Suddenly, cries for help came from in front of him. Is anyone there? Help us! Both male and female voices could be heard, and all sounded panicked, probably not faked. Cries for help from desolate mountains were usually the works of evil creatures, to lure ignorant people into traps. Yet, Wei Wuxian was extremely happy. The evil of the creature was, the better it was for him. He directed the donkey toward the direction of the voices, but couldn't find anything around him. As he looked upward, instead of spirits or monsters, it was the rural clan that he met by the field earlier on, hung on the trees by a huge golden web. The middle-aged man was originally patrolling and scouting in the forest with a few others. However, rather than meeting the prey that they had hoped for, they stepped into a net trap, probably set up by some wealthy clan, which was why they were hanging on the trees, complaining and calling for help. After seeing that someone approached, they immediately brightened up. But the hope faded as they saw that it was a lunatic who came. Although the threads of the deity binding net were thin, the material was fine in quality, making them difficult to break. No matter human, god, demon, spirit, or monster, it would take a long while for the intruder to struggle out since it could only be broken by a superior magical tool. The lunatic probably didn't even know what it was, much less how to get them out of it. He was about to call others to come help him when the crisp sounds of parting branches and stepping on leaves approached. A boy wearing a light-colored robe emerged from within the dark forest. The boy had a vermilion mark in between his eyebrows, his features delicate yet sharp. He was quite young, around the same age as Elaine Sigi, still in his adolescence. He carried a bamboo canister of feathered arrows and a luminous sword on his back, holding a longbow in his hand. The embroidery on his clothes was extremely delicate, forming a magnificent white peony in front of his chest. The golden threads glistened against the dark nighttime shades surrounding him. Wei Wuxian silently exclaimed, "How wealthy!" This must have been a young master studying in the Lanlingjin sect, since the sect was the only one with a white peony as the clan pattern, using the king of all flowers to suggest that they were the king of all cultivators. The vermilion mark implied the meaning of opening the doors toward wisdom and aspiration, illuminating the world with the vermilion light. The young master already had an arrow on his bow and was preparing to shoot it when he realized that the deity binding nets only caught humans. After an initial moment of disappointment, he quickly became annoyed. "I find you idiots every single time. There are more than 400 deity binding nets in the mountain, but you guys have already broken 10 or so, and I haven't even seen the prey yet." Wei Wuxian thought again. How wealthy. A single deity binding net was already expensive, yet he had set up 400 all at once. A smaller clan would become bankrupt after buying so many. But then, of course, this was the Lanlingjin sect. However, wasting deity binding webs like this and not caring about what they caught shouldn't be considered night hunting at all. In fact, it was almost as if they were chasing people away, not allowing others the chance of contributing to the process. It seemed that the cultivators who retreated earlier didn't do it because the prey was difficult, but rather because this sect was one that shouldn't be angered. After a few days of traveling slowly and listening to the intriguing conversations at Buddha's feet, Wei Wuxian gathered a lot of information about the changes to the cultivation world. As the final winner of the 100-year-long cultivational disruption, the Lanlingjin sect was the head of all clans and sects. Leader was even referred to as the commander of all cultivators. Even before this, the Jin clan was arrogant, admirers of extravagant splendor. After the years of being at the top and while strengthening the sect, it had trained all of its disciples to do whatever they wanted to. Even a slightly weaker clan would have to submit to their humiliation, much less a small, rural clan such as this one. This was why, although the people trapped in the nets were red with fury because of the mean words of the boy, they could not talk back. The middle-aged man spoke with tolerance. "Please, young master, do us a small favor and let us down." The boy was restless with the anxiety of his prey still not arriving, and it was convenient for him to direct his anger toward the country bumpkins. He crossed his arms. "You guys should just stay here. In case you mess around and get in my way again, I'll let you down after I catch the spirit-consuming beast. That is, if I still remember you." If they really stayed on the trees for the whole night and happened to bump into the creature that haunted Daffin Mountain, being unable to move, all they could do would be to wait for their souls to be sucked dry. The round-faced girl who gave an apple to Wei Wuxian felt scared and started crying. Wei Wuxian was originally cross-legged on the donkey, but as it heard the sob, his long ears quivered, and it suddenly leaped forward. Following the leap came a long bray. If not for how horrible the bray sounded, its unstoppable vigor could almost pass for a purebred horse. Unprepared for this, Wei Wuxian was thrown off of its back, almost injuring his head as he fell. The donkey ran headfirst toward the boy as if it believed that it could knock him off his feet with its head. The boy's arrow was still poised on the bow, conveniently drawing the bow toward its direction. Wei Wuxian didn't want to find a new mount so soon, so he quickly yanked on its reins. The boy took a look at him, a look of shock to suddenly appear on his face. After a second, the shock turned into disdain. His mouth twitched. "So, it's you." The tone was made of 20% surprise and 80% disgust, making Wei Wuxian blink. The boy spoke again. "Did you lose your marbles after you were thrown back to your village? How could they let you outside when you looked as freaky as this?" Did he really just hear something of such significance? Might it be? Wei Wuxian suddenly realized that Mo Xuanyu's father isn't the head of some small sect, but the famous Jin Guangshan. Jin Guangshan was the last leader of the Lanlingjin sect, having already passed away. On the topic of this man, one sentence could not tell the whole story. He had a fierce wife from a prominent family, and, in fact, He was known for being scared of her. However, even if he was scared, it never stopped him from going to other women. No matter how fierce Madame Jin was, it was impossible for her to follow him 24 hours a day. Therefore, from ladies of distinguished statuses to prostitutes in rural areas, if he could get his hands on one, he wouldn't miss the chance. And although he enjoyed casual relationships and flirted everywhere, having an uncountable amount of illegitimate children, it was extremely easy for him to get bored. After he grew tired of a woman, he would forget about her completely, without any responsibility or whatsoever. Among all of his illegitimate children, there was only one who proved to be exceptionally talented and ended up being taken back, the current leader of the Lanlingjin sect, Jin Guangjiao. Moreover, Jin Guangshan didn't die honorably either. He believed that he was old but vigorous and wanted to challenge himself, fooling around with a group of women. However, unfortunately, he failed and passed away during the act. This was too humiliating, and so the Lanlingjin sect told the public that the old leader died from overworking himself. All of the other clans decided to keep silent about the matter and pretended that they didn't know anything. Anyways, those were the real reasons behind his fame. During the siege in Luanzheng Hill, aside from Jiang Cheng, Jin Guangshan was the second greatest contributor, and now Wei Wuxian had taken over the body of his own illegitimate son. He really didn't know if they were even with each other. Seeing that he was spacing out, the boy grew even more annoyed. Get out of here. It's disgusting just looking at you, you damn gay. In terms of his generation, it was highly possible for Mo Xuanyu to be an elder to the boy, maybe an uncle. After being humiliated by a junior like this, Wei Wuxian thought that, even if not for his own sake, he needed to return the humiliation for Mo Xuanyu's body. What an attitude. I suppose that you didn't have a mother to teach you. Hearing his words, two raging flames sparked in the boy's eyes. He unsheathed the sword on his back and threatened. What did you say? The blade of the sword shone a golden light. It was a rare sword of high quality. Most clans probably couldn't get a small piece of it, even if they spent their whole lives saving for it. Wei Wuxian examined it attentively, somehow thinking that the sword seemed familiar to him. Then again, he had seen his share of gold, top-notch swords. He didn't think too much about it and began to spin a tiny cloth bag that he held in his hand. It was a makeshift spirit-locking bag that he had created a few days ago, using the scraps and pieces of things. As the boy wielded the sword and came toward him, he fished a piece of human-shaped paper out of the spirit-locking bag. He shifted to the side, avoiding the attack, and slapped the paper onto his opponent's back. The boy's movements were already fast, but Wei Wuxian had done a lot of tripping someone while slapping a talisman onto their back, which meant that he was faster. The boy suddenly felt his torso become numb, his back weakening, and he unwillingly collapsed onto the ground, with his sword also falling to the side with a clunk. He couldn't get up no matter how hard he tried, as if a mountain was on top of him. On his back, there was a ghost who had died from gluttony, crushing him to the point that he couldn't even breathe. Although the ghost was weak, it was completely capable of dealing with brats like this one. Wei Wuxian picked up his sword, weighed it in his hands, and swung toward the direction of the deity binding net, splitting it in half. The family fell to the ground in an awkward way, but they sprinted off without saying anything. The round-faced girl seemed as if she wanted to thank him, but she was pulled away by an elder, who was scared that young Master Jin would hate them even more. The boy on the ground was fuming. You damn gay. Good for you, taking this sort of wrong path, because you didn't have enough spiritual powers to do anything. Watch out for your life. Do you know who came today? Today, although the cultivation method that he used in the past was often criticized and, in the long term, it harmed the cultivator's health, it could be mastered quickly. It was also especially attractive because there were no limitations as to the cultivator's spiritual powers or talent, making it so that there were always people who secretly practiced it to find a shortcut. The boy presumed that, after being chased from the Lanlingjin sect, Mo Xuanyu had chosen the dishonorable path, which was a reasonable conclusion to draw, saving Wei Wuxian from a lot of unnecessary trouble. The boy pushed on the ground, but couldn't get up even after a few tries. His face was scarlet, and he gritted his teeth. If you don't stop, I'm gonna tell my uncle, and you're gonna wait for your death. Wei Wuxian wondered, why is it your uncle, not your dad? Who's your uncle again? A voice suddenly came from behind him, a mixture of being bitter and cold. I am his uncle. Do you have any last words? Hearing the voice, all of the blood from Wei Wuxian's body traveled to his head and drained away a moment later. The good thing was that his face was already a pile of white, A shade whiter wouldn't make too much of a difference. A violet-clothed youth approached in confident steps, his jiangsu robe flowing smoothly, and his hand pressing on the hilt of his sword. A silver bell hung by his waist, although it made no sound as he walked. The young man had thin brows and almond eyes. His features were handsome in a sharp way, and his eyes held composed vigor, with a slight intention of attack, appearing to be two bolts of lightning as he stared. He stood 10 steps away from Wei Wuxian, his expression resembling a honed arrow on the bow, ready to be released at any moment. Even his posture emitted an air of arrogance and overconfidence. He frowned. Jin Ling, why did you linger for so long? Do you really need me to come and pick you up? Look at what a terrible situation you're in right now, and get up. After the initial numbing of his head, Wei Wuxian quickly realized what was going on. He curled a finger inside his sleeve and made the piece of paper retreat. Jin Ling felt his back lighten and immediately rolled up, grabbing his sword in the process. He shifted near Jiang Cheng and pointed at Wei Wuxian accusingly. I'm gonna break your legs. With the pair of uncle and nephew standing beside each other, it was clear that they shared a close resemblance, probably able to pass for brothers. Jiang Cheng moved his finger, and the paper doll swiftly flew out of Wei Wuxian's hand and into his own. After taking one look at it, hostility came over his face. He pressured his fingers, and the paper was ignited, burning to dust with the screams of dark spirits. Jiang Cheng spoke grimly. Break his legs? Haven't I told you? If you see this sort of evil and crooked practice, kill the cultivator and feed him to your dogs. Wei Wuxian couldn't even attempt to grab his donkey, backing away at rapid speed. He thought that, after so many years, no matter how much hatred Jiang Cheng had held for him, it would have disappeared long ago. He didn't expect that not only did it not disappear, it became richer, as if it was a jar of aged alcohol. At the present time, his hatred had grown to affect even people who cultivated like him. With someone backing him up, Jin Ling's attacks became more aggressive. Wei Wuxian slid 2 fingers into the spirit-locking bag, about to take something out, when suddenly, the blue glare of a sword slashed out like lightning. It collided with Jin Ling's sword, breaking the powerful sword's golden rays in an instant. It wasn't because of the quality of the swords, but rather the great disparity in the strengths of the persons using the swords. Wei Wuxian had originally calculated the timing, but his movements were suddenly interrupted by the sword's glare, causing him to trip. He fell toward the ground, right on top of a pair of snow-white boots. After pausing for a moment, he slowly lifted his head. What first came into his sight was a long, slender blade, crystalline and translucent, as if it was made of ice. In the cultivation world, this sword was one of the most famous ones. Wei Wuxian had experienced its powers countless times, including both battles fought beside it and against it. The hilt of the sword was forged from pure silver that had been refined with secret techniques. The blade of the sword was extremely thin, almost transparent, sending forth the cold breaths of ice and snow. However, at the same time, it could cut through iron like cutting through mud. This was why, although the sword looked light, as if it could fly away any instant, it was actually quite heavy, unable to be wielded by the average person. Its name was Bichin. The blade turned, and the clank of the sword being inserted back into the scabbard sounded from above Wei Wuxian. At the same time, Jiang Cheng's voice came from afar, and I was wondering who it was. So, it is you, second young Master Elian. The pair of white boots passed around Wei Wuxian, and calmly walked 3 steps forward. Wei Wuxian raised his head and got up. As he walked past the former, slightly brushing their shoulders, he made eye contact with him for a short moment, pretending that it was unintentional. He had an aura of smooth moonlight. The 7-string zither that he carried on his back was narrower than most. Its body was black, made using wood of soft color. The man wore a forehead ribbon with cloud patterns. His skin was fair, features both refined and elegant, as if he was a piece of polished jade. The color of his eyes was especially light, like they were made of colored glass, causing his gaze to be overly distant. His expression held the traces of frost and snow, stern to the degree of being stiff, unwavering even as he saw Wei Wuxian's ridiculous face. There wasn't a single speck of dust or wrinkled spot on him. From his head to his feet, it was impossible to find any fault with his appearance. Even so, 2 capitalized words jumped into Wei Wuxian's mind. Mourning clothes. Mourning clothes, indeed. Although all of the clans in the cultivation world used extravagant words to describe the Guzilan sex uniform as the best-looking uniform, and Elian Wangji as an incomparable beauty, who only appeared once in a blue moon, nothing could help the bitter facial expression. That made him look as though his wife had passed away. In an unlucky year, enemies would often find their paths to cross. Good news always traveled alone, but one disaster always followed the next. Thus, the situation right now. Lan Wangji was silent, staring straight ahead, standing motionlessly in front of Jiang Cheng. Jiang Cheng was already exceptionally handsome, but as they stood face to face with each other, he still seemed a few degrees inferior. He raised one brow and spoke. Han Guangjun, you sure live up to your reputation of being wherever the chaos is. So, you had time to come to this remote area today. Powerful cultivators from prominent clans usually didn't care to pay attention to lower-level praise. However, Lan Wangji was an exception. He never cared for the prey of a night hunt, and wouldn't refuse to go just because the creature was not threatening enough to increase his fame. If anyone wanted help, he would be there. He had been like this ever since he was young. Being wherever the chaos is, was the comment that the public gave him for his night hunts and also praise for his moral character. Right now, Jiang Cheng really didn't seem too polite as he said the words in such a tone. Even the juniors who came following Lan Wangji didn't seem comfortable hearing it. Lan Genji spoke straightforwardly. Isn't sect leader Jiang here as well? Jiang Cheng replied grimly. Tisk, do you really think that you should butt in when your seniors are conversing? The Guzilan sect has always been known for its respectful conduct. Is this really how it teaches its disciples? Lan Wangji seemed as if he didn't want to engage in conversation, throwing Lan Siji a look. The latter understood and told the juniors to speak among themselves. Afterward, he spoke to Jinling. Young Master Jin, night hunts have always been fair competitions amongst the different clans and sects. However, to set up nets all over Daffin Mountain is clearly hindering the cultivators, causing them to fall into the traps. Is this or is this not against the rules of night hunting? Jinling's grim expression was exactly the same as his uncle's. What can I do? It was their own fault for stepping into the traps. I'll solve everything after I finish capturing the prey. Lan Wangji frowned. Jinling was about to speak again, but he suddenly realized that, shockingly, he could neither open his mouth nor make any sounds. Seeing that, Jinling's upper and lower lips became inseparable as if they were glued together. Anger appeared on Jiang Cheng's face. The sloppy manners that he upheld before this were all gotten rid of. You, with the Lan surname, what do you mean by this? It's not your turn to discipline Jinling yet, so release the spell now. The silence spell was used by the Lan sect to reprimand its disciples. Wei Wuxian had suffered a ton from this little trick. Although it wasn't anything too complicated or obscure, only people of the Lan clan could release the spell. If one wanted to forcibly speak, it would result in either their lips being ripped bloody or a hoarse throat for a couple of days. The only solution was to stay silent and reflect upon the wrongdoings until the time limit of the punishment was over. Lan Siji spoke. Sect leader Jiang, there is no need for anger. As long as he does not break the spell forcefully, it would release on its own after 30 minutes. Before Jiang Cheng opened his mouth to speak, a purple-clothed man in the Jiang sect's uniform ran toward them from within the forest. He shouted, "Sect leader." However, after seeing Lan Wangji's presence, he hesitated. Jiang Cheng spoke satirically. Talk. Is there more bad news? The man spoke in a low voice. Not long ago, a blue sword flew over and destroyed the deity binding nets that you had set up. Jiang Cheng glanced at Lan Wangji harshly. His displeasure plastered all over his face. How many were broken? The man replied carefully. All of them. That's more than 400. Jiang Cheng seethed with anger. He didn't expect the journey to be this unlucky. Originally, he came to help Jinling out. Jinling would be turning 15 this year, the age of which he should already be making his debut and starting to compete with the juniors of other clans. Jiang Cheng considered the decision carefully. Before choosing Daffin Mountain as the location of the hunt, he also set up nets everywhere and threatened the cultivators of other clans, showing them the consequences so that they would retreat, in order to let Jinling take the top prize without anyone fighting against him. Although 400 deity binding nets were a whopping price, it wasn't too much for the Yunmengjiang sect. Nonetheless, losing the nets were a small matter, but losing face was not. With Lan Wangji's actions, Jiang Cheng felt a whirlpool of anger at the bottom of his heart, rising higher by every second. He narrowed his eyes, his left hand casually stroking the ring on his right hand's index finger. This was a dangerous sign. Everyone knew that the ring was a menacing, strong magical weapon. Whenever clan leader Jiang started touching it, it meant that he had the intent to kill.